This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Quick correction, I'm not the founder of Home Power Magazine. Been with the magazine for 10 years, and the magazine's actually been published for close to 20 at this point. The founders of the magazine are Richard and Karen Perez. They live down in the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. They've been off-grid for 30 years up there, and really were instrumental in getting a lot of the residential scale renewable energy movement really happening back in the day, you might call it. So I want to just cover quick 3 concepts that will come up frequently in the hour and a half, 2 hours we're going to talk. The first is embodied energy. Folks familiar with the term, kind of what that means, how it works? Okay. Embodied energy, the technical definition would be along the lines of the energy it takes to manufacture, transport, and install a given product. So if you looked at something like a solar electric module, say, or a wind turbine, your car, anything you buy at Walmart, there's energy that goes into making those products. And we're really looking at kind of a life cycle energy use. So when we talk about renewables, because we're using really infinite resources, the sun, the wind, falling water, a lot of these products, the hardware we use to capture that energy will offset the energy it took to manufacture the product in some set number of years, and we'll talk about that more as we go. So it's kind of a revolutionary thing. With fossil fuel-based energy, say coal or natural gas, you're using a finite resource, and so you're always bringing more energy into the equation, and the embodied energy is never offset. So when people talk about free energy, a lot of the times it can be considered kind of pie-in-the-sky stuff, things we'll never really see. But we have hardware right now, solar electric modules, solar hot water, collectors, wind turbines, small-scale hydro turbines that will offset the energy it took to manufacture them in a set number of years. So it's kind of really a revolutionary thing in the big picture if we're looking at the environmental consequences of our energy use. Second thing I want to go through real quick is the difference between conservation and efficiency. Anyone want to take a stab at defining those? Shy crowd. Okay. Conservation, Jimmy Carter made it famous, put on a sweater when you're too cold instead of turning up your thermostat. You're voluntarily altering your actions to save energy, to reduce your energy use. Not everyone wants to do that. So we look at...
Comfort at the same time.
What's that?
Maintaining your comfort at the same time.
Yeah, and I think if you put on the sweater, you are maintaining your comfort. Efficiency, on the other hand, is something that it's a kind of a techno fix. And so you're getting the same comfort out of the energy you use, but you're just using less energy, and you're not altering your habits. And a really probably familiar example for most of the folks here would be switching out your incandescent light bulbs for compact fluorescents. You get the same amount of light, the same amount of usefulness or comfort or function, but you're using a third to a quarter as much energy. And so conservation and efficiency are sort of 2 different concepts, but it's helpful when we look at getting people to adopt energy efficiency or renewable energy technologies because you don't necessarily have to alter your lifestyle too much, and a lot of people aren't willing to do that. So we have a couple different ways that we can get people to reduce their energy footprint, the environmental implications of that. And the last thing, in terms of conceptual ideas, is the idea of payback, financial payback or economic payback versus value. And a lot of the times when I talk about solar electricity, for example, people will say, well, how long does it take to pay back? You know, when will the money that I spend on this equipment, you know, be zeroed out and I'm riding for free electricity? And the reality is now in Ashland, where I'm assuming most of you live, or in the valley, a residential solar electric system will pay for itself in about 10 years if you look at the incentives that are in place right now. And commercial systems, like on United Bicycle Institute, there are several around town, will pay for themselves in about 5 years, and that's a pure economic payback. And you can get more detailed and look at internal rates of return and whatnot, and then we start getting numbers that solar hot water systems, your investment, tax-free, can beat the historical return, 8% or so of the stock market. Solar electric systems can beat a lot of more traditional investments in the market as well. So we're looking at all of that in a really purely financial way. But when you shop for something, let's say you went out today and you bought a new dining room set, which I don't know if any of you would have probably done today. I certainly didn't. But you're looking at that in terms of what value you'll get for the money that you spent on it. Are the chairs comfortable? Do you like the way it looks? Does your wife or husband or partner like the way that it looks? And we bring, was it made with environmentally sound materials or recycled materials? And there are all these other things that come into play. And so we're looking for value in the products we buy. When we buy a car, mileage is one thing that we look at. Cost is one thing that we look at. Comfort, do we need four-wheel drive to get up to the slopes, whatever it might be. But when we get into renewable energy, a lot of times all these values are kind of set aside and people are just looking at what's the payback, what's the financial payback. And it's, I would say, frustrating in a way, or just a chance to educate people in a way, because there aren't very many things that we buy based purely on the payback. The last time that you bought a couch, did you sit down and run the numbers and figure out when you were going to get your money back, which you wouldn't. So when we look at renewables, there are all these other sort of more peripheral value things that we really need to consider, and we do it when we buy food. If we buy organic food, might cost a little bit more, might not, but we're concerned or we value that the nutrient value might be higher, that herbicides weren't being used, pesticides, the farm workers aren't exposed to kind of hazardous conditions, and there are all these things that go into that decision-making process. With electricity, you get your bill from Ashland or wherever it is, you sign it, the money goes out, and so renewables are sort of considered along those lines. And I just want you to kind of think outside of that box and really consider value with these technologies as well. I also have a bit of the flu that's been going around, so hopefully my voice will hang in there through this. Okay, so I guess we can just start in on energy and why it's important, the way that we make it and the way that we use it, why it's important. And I really kind of look, in my mind anyway, at three things. The environmental implications of the energy that we use, what it means in terms of our independence or our dependence on whatever the sources might be for that energy, and then also kind of the global resource perspective. Environmentally, climate change has been giant in the news lately. I switch back and forth between reading the San Francisco Chronicle and the Oregonian, and it seems like pretty much daily there's information on climate change or renewables, and we're really starting to see it come into the mainstream media. So there's definitely a heightened awareness, and we know that there are environmental problems with the way that we currently make and use energy. So the effect that coal-fired plants have in terms of CO2 emissions, affecting climate change or the cars that we drive, a whole host of factors. The pollutants that come out of coal-fired plants. I think in most of Oregon, here in Ashland, the way that the municipal utility buys power or electricity, most of it's coming from hydro sources. I think it's 90% plus. A couple of percent come from the hydro turbine that's up the watershed here locally, and then a lot is purchased off of the Columbia River. But most of Oregon, we think, well, we have the Columbia, there's all the dams on it. We have relatively green electricity for a lot of the state, except for the salmon, how they're concerned. But a lot of the electricity, I think 60% in Oregon, is coming from coal. Coal has heavy metal contaminants that are released, again, the CO2, all of that stuff. And so our energy use, well, it's sort of remote and it's invisible electricity. We flip the switch, we pay the power bill. There are really big implications in Oregon and across the country and obviously globally with something like climate change that our energy choices affect. The second thing is energy independence or dependence. And we see a lot of people getting involved with renewables because they're into being independent. And everyone likes to be independent to really varying degrees. And making your own electricity is something that really grabs people's imagination, and they think, this is cool. I can make electricity on my rooftop, and I don't need to get it from the Columbia, and I'm out of the loop. I'm not responsible for the condition for the salmon or whatever it might be. And we find with the work that I do with home power and work in the field that the idea of being independent in your energy use really resonates with people. It makes them feel proud, and it's a way that they can act as individuals and get themselves out of these loops that are pretty destructive for the environment. Energy independence kind of leads us into the third thing, and that's kind of the global energy use if we look at it that way. And obviously, there's a lot of money that goes to supporting military forces across the planet, big corporations that are controlling energy use, directing it across the planet. And you hear a lot now the term energy independence being used in the context of the United States. And we need to wean ourselves from foreign oil so we can be more energy independent. And I think that is, it's definitely something to pay attention to. We have what I consider to be a couple of resource-based wars going on right now that our tax dollars are paying for. And I think as citizens, it's responsible for us to look to alternatives. And I don't know, it's kind of not too much of a leap for me to really think of using renewables as a way to really push for peace, which is a good thing. So we can move into some specific stuff. Anyone have questions at this point? I bet that you don't. No?
You're saying 90% of the power comes from, in Ashland comes from hydro, but generally overall in Oregon, 60%?
Yeah, and those are rough figures, but yeah, close to that. It might be, the last time I looked.
You want to repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. So he was just asking about electricity generation sources for Ashland. And I was saying it's 90% plus of the electricity here, grid electricity in Ashland is coming from hydro sources, but statewide, about 60% is coming from coal. So the coal use is sort of minimal rather here in Southern Oregon, and that's just based on the way that the electric company chooses to purchase power. So, okay. In terms of your day-to-day lives, what action has the biggest impact on the environment in terms of energy, you think? Yeah, you got it. Full on, the biggest thing. And people get captivated by the notion of having solar electric panels on their roof or modules or putting in wind turbines. There are a lot of other things that we can do that will have a bigger impact in terms of reducing our environmental footprint. Rogue Valley has a pretty good public transportation system. It's not great. It's not like Eugene. Has a pretty good situation, bike lanes and whatnot. So really simple ideas like car sharing, riding public transportation, just trying to really drive less. If you can think along those lines one day a week or something like that, you'll probably have the biggest impact of anything that you do in terms of your energy use. People don't really, that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to shift. I mean, we've had automobile-based development for however long, 50, 60 years. We have suburbs outside of cities. We have dedicated residential living areas. We don't have mixed residential and commercial in very many places. So it makes it really difficult for people to get around without cars. It can even be sort of dangerous at points to try to get, one side of the street to the other. So if you need a car, there are several options out there. Hybrid electric vehicles. Anyone drive one? Okay. Hybrid electric vehicles. You're buying a new car, but you can really increase your mileage, 25, 30% or something like that is one option. There's been a lot in the news recently about biofuels, and there would be talking about biodiesel or ethanol. The Grange just down here just started selling a diesel mix. It's B20, which is 20% biodiesel and 80% petroleum diesel. And a really cool thing about biofuels, we'll talk about biodiesel in particular here, is that you're burning a resource that has emissions. Just like if you were burning petroleum diesel, some of the pollutants are less. But in terms of carbon dioxide, which is contributing to global warming, we get to pretty close of a kind of a net zero input into the environment. You grow a crop like soybeans, rapeseed, things that are typically used on a industrial scale, biodiesel processing, and then that fuel is processed. You burn it in your car, it releases CO2. But the next year, in terms of the carbon cycle, the next crop is going to fix about the same amount of carbon as you released burning that fuel. And so you're creating kind of an annually closed loop in terms of your carbon use. It's not 100% efficient because there's a lot of energy that goes into manufacturing the fuel, manufacturing the biodiesel in this case, or ethanol. It needs to be transported to its point of sale. So we're not talking about a complete zeroing out, but it's really pretty close. And if you look at something like burning petroleum diesel or gasoline, that loop is happening over maybe 100 million years or something, however long it takes to make, for the Earth to make petroleum. And, geologic time scale is sort of different than annual time scale. So it's a really cool thing. I started, actually I have a Suzuki Trooper from this gentleman in the second row that is diesel and runs on biodiesel. They sell it Phoenix Organics down in Phoenix. They have B100. It's 100% biodiesel you can run in your rig, and it's a really super cool way to get yourself out of that loop. And it's a really hard one to get out of. My place is up at Indian Memorial. I spend a fair amount of time in the car, but running on biofuels is something I can do to really help lessen my primary impact on the environment, I would say. So, pretty cool thing. One of the things I love about biodiesel, biofuels, is that it's sort of changing, but typically like the hippies are the ones that are kind of into renewables and biofuels and all that stuff. But the really cool thing with biodiesel is supports American farmers. And so the rednecks, and I speak highly of them, I are one sort of, they dig it. They dig it. And so it's just one of the technologies that we use that is kind of surpassing these political things that divide us. It's something functional that we can really all use. And that's reflected through a lot of these energy sources. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's really technology bringing people together, which I think is really good. So that's sort of the transportation part of this wrap here. We have a question in the back there.
What can we do about the male power struggle with huge, loud trucks that they don't really need except for their power trip? Oh, that's my opinion.
So
I see these guys driving trucks. I never see them hauling anything.
yeah.
I'm from a farm. That's why.
Yeah, there you go. Bill Morrissey, a favorite folkie of mine from New Hampshire, has I got a 4-wheel drive with extra chrome. I keep it on the paved roads close to home. So that's sort of the concept, you know. And some people need big rigs. The question was, why are people driving such big rigs when they don't need them? And got me, you know what I mean? Got me. Don't know. I think that as fuel costs go up, it's going to drive people to smaller cars. During the last boost that was, or the last gas price spike that was following the hurricanes down in the Gulf, and then whatever price manipulation happened after that, we saw statistically sales of big SUVs and whatnot dropped. So if the fuel is cheap, people are probably going to drive those cars, and there's the whole kind of cultural thing too. They're hip, Driving a Prius is starting to get more hip, I guess, but small cars. You have a question here?
Yeah, have you heard anything about the cars that run on water and output steam? Is that true? And if it is true and we all got one, would that have any impact on the environment?
I've heard about them. I always say, when they have a warranty and you can buy them, then it might be sort of a viable thing. And you never want to stifle people's creativity. People come up with ingenious products all the time. 100 years ago, no one would have thought you could make electricity from sunshine. Actually, they did. That was the photovoltaic effect was discovered in like 1850 or something like that. It's been around for a while, but it wasn't put into use until about 1950. You have a question back here?
I've heard that something like ethanol takes more energy to grow the corn, to transport it and all, than the use provides.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true?
I would say it's not true. Like with a lot of things, there are a lot of numbers out there, and it depends on who's running the numbers. For 20 years, there was a big lobby, same lobby that was involved with the tobacco industry, actually, that was saying climate change wasn't happening. And so I think it really depends on what research you see, and over time, more definitive or conclusive research comes in. And so, that's not my understanding, or maybe the way I choose to understand it, the data that I look at. But I think that there's definitely a positive return on that ethanol. It's weird. It's weird that the information that's out there, and I guess why would you trust me any more than someone that was saying ethanol is an energy loser. So I think you just really need to do the research on the web and look for sources that you can trust. So a lot of times what I do when I do like research is just look. If it's Greenpeace, they're going to be saying one thing. If it's someone on the other end of the spectrum, they're going to be saying something else. And I always sort of try to look kind of in the middle. So, yes?
About, got a throat problem, but
Me too.
about 3 or 4 days ago, I saw a quick article in the paper. Brazilian farmers are becoming very put out by the U.S. approach. We're buying up all their corn to convert to ethanol. Corn prices in Brazil are going out of sight.
Yep.
Okay. This in turn can force more farmers to start depleting the rainforest.
Sure.
So we got a negative cycle going as a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point. I read recently, it's kind of a similar article a couple weeks ago in the paper, and they were talking about tortilla prices really spiking in Mexico, doubling, and that's a food that, a nutrient source that is really utilized by lower income people in Mexico typically, and using corn for ethanol was part of that. I've heard numbers, and again, how you verify them, but I heard recently numbers that I think it was for 1 gallon, I think it was for 1 tank of fuel, a 15-gallon tank of fuel, ethanol, had as much energy in it that would feed a person for a year. So, and I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a trippy thing to think about burning food to move cars around, you know. And then you look at numbers like, and it's been a while since I've seen these, but globally right now, there's enough to get every human on the planet is 28 or 3,200 calories a day or something. But we have obviously distribution problems, political problems, economic problems that limits that food from getting around. So one of the big things, if anything, to take home from me talking tonight is that none of this stuff is like a silver bullet at all. If there maybe is one, it's just use less and use energy efficiently. And that is probably the basis that's really going to change things. None of it is silver bullet. Here's a good example in town. You can convert diesel engines. You can convert them to run on straight vegetable oil. And so you put in a system, kind of a parallel fuel system, a second tank. You can put vegetable oil right in there that's filtered down. You preheat that tank with hot coolant from the engine's cooling system. You start up on regular diesel. The vegetable tank heats up. You switch over to that tank, and you're driving on straight vegetable oil. Excuse me, which is sort of amazing. Diesel engine was designed as a multi-fuel engine to run on vegetable oil or petroleum. But here in town, it's getting pretty hard to get used cooking oil, right, from the restaurants. And people have tanks that they're setting out that are collecting the fuel, and they're manufacturing kind of like garage bathtub biodiesel, selling it and whatnot. People are busting locks off of those bins to get in the oil. You know, it's kind of crazy. But, you know, if we talk about, you know, industrial scale agriculture and using that corn for fuel, there's obviously huge limits to it, huge limits. And it's echoed here in town in terms of the availability of waste vegetable oil, which 10 years ago they were paying, you know, restaurants were paying to get it removed. So, you got a question here?
Speaking of industrial scale agriculture.
I'll take it back when you're done.
Speaking of industrial scale agriculture, the ethanol industry is corn and in this country, and most of the people that are benefiting from this are Cargill, ADM, Monsanto, and the like. And if anybody's hasn't seen that movie, The Future of Food, I highly suggest it. And it's actually literally killing small family farmers, and it's a sorry state of affairs. But to answer that question about the efficiencies of the ethanol, there are some ethanol plants in Minnesota that are using the waste heat for all year-round greenhouses, and they're starting to use scrap wood pulp and fiber for some of the heat sources as well. They're looking into a lot of different ways to make it more efficient.
Yeah, right on. So it's like cogeneration is the way it's typically referred to. That's awesome. Thanks for adding that.
Back to the car question. My lease is up in May, so this hits home for me. I'm really looking at a more fuel efficient or better kind of car, and do you have a recommendation for any information sites or anything to help me make the best decision, whether it's a hybrid or biodiesel? That's part one of the question. Part two is, because it's Ashland and a lot of people are conscious about this, I would guess that the supply is less than the demand for these kinds of cars. And so do you have any suggestions about where to find perhaps an used Priuses you can find? Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
They're starting to.
So those are my two parts of the question: information sources, and then where to find these things.
Information sources. I think that if you want to look at mainstream publications like Consumer Reports or whatnot, they've been doing a pretty good job looking at hybrid electric vehicles and comparing them. There's a really cool magazine called the Green Car Journal. Thank you, Scott. That they have a lot of kind of like techno prototypey stuff that maybe we'd all love to have someday. But they also run really great comparative articles that are breaking down features, fuel efficiency with vehicles that run on E85, 85% ethanol, or hybrid electric vehicles. So in general, hybrids are if you're looking for a kind of a new car, that sort of thing, and you want a car, not a big truck. A lot of people are going with hybrids because there's a pretty big selection of those vehicles. And right now, in terms of diesel rigs to run on biodiesel, the selection is pretty limited if you're looking at new cars. I've actually heard that there are new standards coming out for kind of super efficient diesel vehicles. And right now, I think 60% of the commuter car market in Europe is diesel. It might even be higher than that, which is obviously not what's happening here. But their fuel prices are really high, so it pushes fuel efficiency in these vehicles. People want to buy a rig that gets 50 miles a gallon, not 20. But your choices are pretty limited in the States now, unless you're looking to buy big four-wheel drive, Dodge Cummins turbo diesel. Yeah, and then so if you're looking for new rigs, diesel is pretty limited. There's supposed to be new models coming a year or two down the road. They're bringing in Volkswagen and whatnot are bringing in some of this European diesel technology that's more efficient, less polluting. Diesel can have pretty high particulate emissions and whatnot, especially in the old engines. And then you can definitely look at older rigs for diesels. There are a lot of old diesel Volkswagen Jettas out there, and that kind of thing. So
And you can
rabbits.
convert that to do biodiesel?
Yeah, biodiesel you can run. I'd say like up to 50% biodiesel without any modifications in those engines. So with biodiesel, you're modifying the fuel. You're basically making it thinner so that it'll go through the engine's injectors. If you're looking at running straight vegetable oil, then that requires a conversion to the rig. So some issues with older diesel rigs is a biodiesel has a higher solvent action. So if you're running like B100 in an older, say early 80s or late 70s diesel rig, you can have trouble with fuel lines. The fuel can bleed through and that sort of thing. And I've also heard some problems with people running B100, 100% biodiesel in some of the newer rigs too, like Volkswagen, some of the TDIs and whatnot, some of the injector parts and gaskets on the fuel pump break down over time due to that biodiesel. So I think if you want to play it super safe, you can go get 20% biodiesel at the Grange here, and then you have no trouble. So you have a question here? With the mic.
I like that movie. I'm sure you saw it, Who Killed the Electric Car? This thing there. And, the one thing in the movie they didn't explain, because I rode in one of those electric cars, and I know they had the batteries up to 120. Like you could get 120 miles on a charge. And I didn't understand in the movie, they kept that old man and his wife, and they supposedly had this new technology, and I don't remember them ever saying just exactly what the range you could get on a charge. I assume it was 300 miles. So now anyway, GM is getting back into it again, except I guess they've got a car that runs on electricity and gas, and the range on the electric part is only 40 miles, which is nothing. So I was wondering if you know anything about, what could be the range on one of those all-electric vehicles.
Yeah. That's always been the big issue with electric rigs to date, is that the mileage has been pretty limited. Most of the ones on the road right now that are pure electric vehicles, not hybrids, hybrids share a internal combustion engine with electric motors. But pure electric vehicles, most of them around now are conversions. Like you saw in the movie, major auto manufacturers pulled the plug on them. So we see Volkswagen Rabbits, they call them Volts Rabbits. Volts. They'll get maybe 40, 50 miles on a charge, and they're running golf cart batteries, T105s like you'd see in golf carts. I think one of the really cool things that's going to come out of the whole kind of interest in hybrid vehicles is that there's a lot of work being done with battery technologies to create higher density energy storage devices. So I think that and I'm not super up to speed on some of the electric vehicle stuff, but they're doing aftermarket conversions to some of the Priuses and whatnot, and like tripling or quadrupling the battery packs. And I think that they're getting like over 100-mile range in those things at this point. So it's getting up there. Batteries, I live with batteries. I sleep sort of near them up at my off-grid place, and it's a technology that to this point hasn't really changed much in 100 years, and I think that now it's really starting to happen again with the hybrids. So I think once we can get really good range out of those EVs, they're going to get really popular. So yeah, way in the back there. Hey, how are you, Matt?
I have a question and a couple small points of clarity.
Uh-huh.
Oh, thank you. There we go.
You're booming up here.
I'm booming. Okay. If you watch that Who Killed the Electric Car movie carefully at the end, you'll find that they were, and this was, some years ago, and it may be that things are even better right now, that they had cars with 130 to 150 mile range. And even when they had it, when the Saturn car, the electric car first came out, it only had a 75-mile range. And and they ran statistics, and they found that actually met, even a 70-mile range car met 80% of the people's needs.
Yeah, right on. Yep.
And so now we have lithium-ion batteries, and we have actually better battery technology out there. Unfortunately, defense contractors are sitting on it. But even at a 150 miles, it's pretty viable, and we could have zero emissions. So my question to you is, do you know who in this area might be doing electric car conversions? Who knows how to do that? It's not rocket science.
In the past, we ran a lot of EV conversion articles in Home Power, the magazine that I work with. The people that I'm really familiar with are Mike and Sherry Prang. They're with Electro Automotive, and they're actually down in California. But they sell kits, conversion kits for Volkswagen, primarily rabbits, but also trucks, and they can put together custom stuff. So it's Electro Automotive, probably .com, I would guess. Mike and Sherry Prang, really good folks. Prange, California. Scott, you know where they're?
Santa Cruz?
Yeah, Santa Cruz, I think. Sounds right. Yeah. And just one point of clarification, too. When we look at electric vehicles, you bring them home, you charge them overnight. When they're driving, there aren't emissions, but there are emissions from the energy source. So if you're using coal, your electricity is coal-fired, you have emissions associated with that power plant. Typically, you're going to have less emissions if you're controlling it at a central point, like a power plant. If the feds have their act together and they push stringent emissions regulations and whatnot, it's a lot easier to control one power plant that's fueling, say, 1,000 cars than it is to keep 1,000 cars running efficiently and well-tuned and their tires pumped up and whatever it is on the road. So another super cool thing I read recently is in the United States, right now, power plants like coal plants or nuke plants takes a while to kind of ramp them up. You don't do it at the flip of a switch. So they have a lot of excess energy. They're kind of like idling overnight or whatnot. And I read it. There's a number that if we had electric vehicles that were as efficient as we could build them right now with today's technology, just the idle capacity of the power plants that are built right now, and these are, it's not all like great stuff. It's kind of the nasties, coal and nukes and whatever, but they could run 80% of the commuter vehicles in the country if they were running 24/7. So, which, there would be increased emissions related to that, but it was kind of a cool reality check just to see that, hey, theoretically, like this guy back there pointed out, most of the trips around town are short. People are driving 10 miles, that sort of thing, to work or to school and back. And a lot of that could be done using grid electricity to charge electric vehicles, and then we control the emissions at the source, and we got a better scenario happening.
On that same point, I used to work in power plants, and when we did ramp down in the middle of the night, the efficiency went in the toilet, basically.
Sure.
So you're actually contributing to the efficiency of the plant.
Yeah, increasing the efficiency. Yeah,
because
cool.
when you're burning got and doing that, that's way inefficient compared to a power plant. So.
Yeah, right on. Great. Thanks for the point. Got a question up here. We gotta hang on.
My question was, what about, I mean, not counting solar and wind, free energy? I mean, we have electromagnetic energy, we have invisible energy. What research is being done in that area?
That's outside of my area of expertise, I would say. So I'm kind of tracking things with warranties that people can buy. And again, I'm all for bring it on, you know what I mean? Stick a meter on it, and let's see what it can do. So, yes?
Back to the homeowners level of this. On a practical level, can you give some idea what it costs for someone to get off the grid or mostly off the grid?
In terms of your electricity use? Can we hold that question until a little bit?
Okay.
And I'll definitely address that for sure.
So, okay, you've got solar power on your house to charge your electric car.
Yeah.
That's the way to get out of some of that emissions loop.
Yeah, right on.
But what is up with all the batteries?
What is
the lifespan of the batteries, and what is the cost environmentally? What do you know of that whole side?
In the vehicle you're talking about?
If we start going to lots of electric cars with all these batteries, when the batteries go bad, what happens there?
Yeah, right on. Good question. I wish I brought some magazines along with me, but I didn't bring the issue. We just did a great article on this couple down in California that they have a batteryless grid tie solar electric system and a converted Volkswagen Rabbit. And they're charging the whole thing. Last year they drove 15,000 miles on, they drove that rig 15,000 miles on electricity that was produced by sunshine, which is super cool, like it's possible, you know, I mean, to do. So batteries are like nasty, you know what I mean? Again, I live with them. Steel is the most highly recycled material in the US, and I've read that batteries are the second. So they recycle the lead in the batteries, the plates, the lead plates, the plastic housing, the electrolyte if it's disposed of properly. You know, so batteries, as funky as they kind of are to deal with, I've ruined many pairs of jeans hauling those things around. They're pretty highly recycled. In electric vehicles, you know, these conversions, which are what I'm familiar with, you get 6, 7 years, 8 years out of a battery pack, and you'll be running maybe a dozen, 14, 16 golf cart batteries, depending on the voltage of the motor. So I wouldn't say it's kind of horrible. I mean, they're highly recycled. There's nasty stuff like, you know, they ship them to India or China or whatever, and the conditions where they're breaking those things down, I've, you know, read is bad. Again, none of this is silver bullet sort of thing. So best thing you can do in that case is take really good care of your batteries, keep them watered, charge them well, you know, make them last as long as you can. So that's a great question, though. Yeah.
About the feasibility of electric vehicles, they have been feasible for quite some time. And if anybody is in the market for a supercar, Tesla Motors has a Tesla Roadster right now, 2-seater, 0 to 60 in around 4 seconds. It gets 250 miles to a charge.
Okay.
Tesla Motors.
Yeah.
It's without all
Tesla,
the fancy options.
I can talk about those things a little bit. I actually I read about that in the Chronicle maybe, I don't know, last year or something like that. These are like freaking Ferrari-looking sports car, and they had I was down at a conference in San Jose last fall, and at one of the receptions they had one of those rides there, and it was like, you never seen so much kind of testosterone poisoning dude energy going on around that thing. You know, they did you plug it in and the gas cap, and it was a really sweet ride. And okay, thanks. We got 10 minutes to break, and I'm getting like super behind. But I read a great quote in that, and they were saying in the newspaper article that I read, and they said, the electric vehicle isn't going to come out of Detroit. is going to come out of Silicon Valley. It takes new minds, new people working on it, which I thought was beautiful, and it's for real, you know. So, okay, one more question in the back on the car stuff, and then we're going to, as my click and clack.
The Zap car. Oh, okay, video. Okay, the Zap car is $8,000 to $10,000, and it goes 40 miles an hour, and it goes 120 on a charge, and it's built on a motorcycle base. Have you driven those?
Haven't driven them, no, but there's
You
some
can
really...
buy them in Medford. There's somebody selling them out in Medford.
There's Zap cars. There's the GEM cars. They're actually manufactured by Daimler Chrysler, which is sort of a trip. There's, I think, 30,000 of them on the road right now, and they're, what's that? What is it called? It's the GEM, G-E-M car. And those are technically classified as neighborhood electric vehicles, and they all fall into different categories depending on the regulations that govern vehicles, I guess. What's road legal and whatnot. So by law, neighborhood electric vehicles are limited to 25 miles an hour. You can drive them on roads that have up to 30-mile-an-hour speed limits. You know, they're small rigs, sort of evolved golf carts, and then they put everything on them to make them road ready or legal. So things like headlights, windshield wipers, turn signals, all that kind of thing. But the gentleman in the back pointed out earlier that a lot of the trips that we take in town are going to be under 10 miles. You know, 10 miles round trip, 20 miles round trip, and these neighborhood electric vehicles are really cool ways to get around. You see them, there's a couple around. I see one every once in a while driving between Talent and Ashland on 99, which is technically illegal because that's 55 miles an hour. They don't seem to care, and I don't either. So, okay, we probably have like 5 minutes to break or something like that, or okay. So I'm going to just blast through the boring topic, weatherization and efficiency. It's not super sexy, you know, to cock your windows or whatever, but I've kind of talked a bunch about efficiency, conservation, and the most important thing in terms of your house, you know, you get your car trip together, your transportation trip together, is to really look hard at weatherizing it. There's assistance available through Ashland. If you're outside of Ashland, some of the other utilities, gas or electric utilities have some assistance available. So just doing really simple things like replacing single pane windows with double pane argon-filled windows, you'll triple the R value. You'll cut the heat loss by 300%, 3x through those windows. You know, sealing air gaps. I'm pretty sure that the Ashland utility, and someone clarify me on this if I'm wrong, they come out and do like a home energy analysis at your house and blower door tests and stuff like that. People have had that done? If you're electric, okay. All that stuff is great to do. It's a free service. Most utilities, Pacific Power does it. Avista, the gas company, will do that for you. And really just lessen the energy use, tighten up the envelope of your house. You get great bang for your buck in terms of payback for adding insulation to your house, blow in more insulation into your attic, put more insulation under the floors and all that. And you know, you can probably whack, you know, conservatively 10, 15% off of your heating and cooling bills by weatherizing like that. And then we also want to look at running energy efficient appliances. Just some real quick numbers. Anyone familiar with Energy Star? You heard of that whole thing? Yeah. Do you work for Energy Star?
No,
just kidding.
I just moved into a house that had the washer and dryer, and you get money back.
Yeah, you bet. Yep. Through the Oregon Office of Energy, they have a rebate. I think there might even be some federal money available now too, which that was a miracle that made it through that. But anyway. Yeah, so a refrigerator that you'd buy now that's Energy Star rated is going to be, I'll probably use about 1/3 as much electricity, give you the same service. Again, this is an efficiency upgrade, technical fix. You're not changing your lifestyle. You can still spit ice cubes through the doors or whatever you like to do with your refrigerator. But they'll use, compared to a fridge that's like 10 years old, it'll use about 1/3 as much energy. So it's just being smarter about the way we use energy, use electricity, and you don't suffer any kind of inconvenience factor from that. So Energy Star is, and just quick rundown on kind of how it works, it's a it's a federal program. It's a department of the it's in the Department of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and they certify electric appliances. They're doing homes now, all sorts of appliances, and they kind of set these different bars for energy use. And so typically an Energy Star rated appliance is going to be 15 or 20, it depends on the category, % more efficient than the average model, the average refrigerator. And so it's a really cool and easy way if you don't want to like get super geeky on it and compare all these different models and whatnot. If you go to wherever you buy appliances and look for things with Energy Star sticker on it, it just makes a kind of a layup to get an appliance that's pretty efficient. I got 5 minutes. And if you're really more into it and you want to find the super efficient refrigerator or washer or dryer, it's energystar.gov because it's a Fed thing. And you can compare models. You can say, I want a 16 cubic foot refrigerator with the freezer on the bottom, and it'll just kind of lay out the kilowatt hour use, the energy use yearly, compare different models. It's really super cool. You can do it for washing machines, and it'll give you information for some of the appliances on the standby power that it draws. Phantom loads, they're referred to a lot of the time. Just did kind of, some recent numbers, and I measured my girlfriend's DVD player for electricity use, and it was really fascinating for me. The DVD player used 11 watts when it was like spinning up a movie, and it used 9 watts if it was just kind of on and sitting there, and if you shut it off, it still used 3 watts. So, yeah, and so if you fell asleep after you watched the movie and the thing stayed like on the whole time, it used 6 times more electricity over a 24-hour period just sitting there not doing anything than when you were watching the movie. And so Energy Star and all of that, you have lots of appliances in your house that are kind of like designed like that. And one of the things that Energy Star is doing is really pushing these regulations hard so that they're motivating appliance manufacturers to build more efficient appliances, more efficient power supplies, transformers, the whole thing. So it's a really cool thing. So your tax dollars at work doing something good, for sure. So.
They also, the washers use less water.
Yeah.
In the efficiency.
Yeah, there you go.
Per gallonage of per water.
Yeah. So she's saying Energy Star washer is using less water. That's less water you have to pump. Yeah, less water you have to pump if you have a well. Less water you have to heat, too, no matter what. So. Yes?
In a situation where you say, okay, I want to upgrade all my appliances, would you say that probably the refrigerator or maybe the washer would be in terms of the one appliance that you would maybe replace first that would get the most mileage in terms of energy?
Yeah. If you have like maybe 6 or 8 kids, maybe the washing machine and the dryer. Yeah, water heater is good. Refrigerator, I'm pretty in tune with appliance energy use. Before I got involved with home power, I installed solar electric, wind electric, hydroelectric systems, and that was about a decade ago. And at that time, it was really almost all off-grid stuff. So appliances really needed to be super energy efficient. If you used more energy than you generated with your renewable energy systems that day, people were typically firing up an engine generator, which is expensive, loud, and in those off-grid systems, the refrigerator was always the big thing. And so, yeah, if you have a refrigerator that's 10 years old, I think that'd be a great thing to look at. And this gentleman up here talked about water heater. That's another big one. Water heater is typically about 13%, 11%, 15%, depending on the household of your electricity use or energy use if it's gas, is going to your water heater. So that's a really good thing to look at too. You want to look at water heaters that have high insulation values. Some of them are getting sort of smarter. You can set them. They have controls where you can set them to kind of cycle on and off at different times of the day. And then there are also tankless water heaters that you can install that heat water at kind of point of use. They're really, really popular in Europe. You're just running cold water through a series of heat exchangers, if it's electric, or through a small boiler. If it's gas and you turn on the hot water tap, it makes hot water. When you turn off the tap, the heater turns off. And it's a really pretty radically different concept compared to an electric tank style water heater that is just kind of heating water all day. It's like keeping a kettle on the stove all day when you have a cup of tea twice a day or something like that. Realistically, you're going to get, I have like 3 more seconds here, with a tankless heater, you're going to maybe pick up, depending on how frequently you use hot water in your house, probably between like 10 and 20, maybe 25% more efficient with a tankless heater, but they're 3 times more expensive to buy. Electric ones, you're going to need to run new circuits. Gas ones, you might need to run some new gas piping so the heater doesn't get starved for fuel. So there's more costs going in. They can be a really cool option with new construction, especially. Get your kind of infrastructure all set up. So, any more questions on the boring topic? Okay, so I think we want to take a break now. And thanks for all the great questions. It was cool. So, okay. So we can just roll right into it here. 4 more topics I want to talk about. Passive solar design, and we'll go into that, not super deep, but there's some really cool things about it. Making hot water using the sun, making electricity using the sun, 2 totally different technologies. We'll talk about that a little bit. I also want to talk just briefly about wind power and hydroelectricity. Systems or homes that we cover in the magazine that are designed and built from the ground up with passive solar design, considering passive solar design, we see them cutting heating and cooling loads compared to a comparative home that's the same square footage and the same climate by 50% and sometimes more. Heating and cooling is usually 45%, 50% of a household's energy use. Can be higher, it depends on the climate. And so in terms of the money you spend and the implications that your energy use has on the environment, if you're building from the ground up, you can do super, super cool things with passive solar design. Some of you might have seen passive solar design. There's earth ships, which are in Taos, New Mexico. They're a big kind of thing there. And kind of 70s and early 80s style passive solar houses with angled glass and kind of funky, different looking. And a lot of the modern passive solar design has really moved away from the angled glass, and I guess you'd consider sort of the first round of American or this century's passive solar design. I have to go on a total tangent here real quick, but hiking in Cedar Mesa in Utah, southern Utah, I was going on these trails, and it was kind of not a super traveled area, and following this creek drainage up, and I started coming into Anasazi cliff dwellings, and which I've always been fascinated about, and that was like 800-year-old kind of stuff and older, and I would kind of come around these bends in the creek drainage, and I'd see, look at my compass, and I started figuring out like that tons of them had like a southern orientation. So it was 1,000, 1,200 years ago, people were using really passive solar design in terms of siting. They were facing their homes towards the sun to stay warm, which is just bringing it up. One, because it was a really beautiful experience, and 2 is like they're not new ideas and they're not that complicated. So if we look at passive solar design, there's really a handful of major components to it. One, in the northern hemisphere, you want to have your house facing south, so you can collect sunshine during the winter months. To keep the house cool during the summer months, you want to size the overhangs on your home appropriately so that you can shade the windows in the summer. The sun's higher in the sky during the summer, so if you have an appropriate overhang, it's going to block the sun from entering the building. In the winter, the sun's path is lower in the sky, so with the proper overhang sizing and specification, you get full light into the space during the winter. Typically, that solar energy that's being captured, that heat energy, is stored in a masonry floor, so there'll be like a concrete slab with tile over it, maybe some throw rugs, that sort of thing. So you're creating sort of a heat sink in the living space. Most of the windows in passive solar homes are oriented to the south. You have minimal windows on the east and west. West can be really problematic for overheating, and it's hard to shade when the sun is super, super low in the evening sky. Insulating the building really well. And passive solar homes that I've been in, and we built one actually for the founders of Home Power, they lived in a 16 by 16 foot shack, I think is probably a nice way to say it. We called it the Plywood Palace. They lived in there for, I don't even know, 22 years or something like that. Super simple living, it was cool, 6 miles off grid. And we built them about an 1,800 square foot passive solar house. They burn maybe 1.5 cords, 2 cords of wood a year if it's been cloudy for about 5 days or something like that and real cold outside. They have to kick in the supplemental heat. But we're heating that house. It has the passive solar design, kind of what I just talked about, facing south, overhangs, insulation, windows in the right locations. So the passive solar energy coming in, and then we also have solar hot water collectors on the roof of the house that feed hydronic tubing inside the home itself for kind of a more active renewable energy heat source. And the super cool thing about the passive solar homes is that you really minimize the temperature fluctuations. So if you live in a house with a HVAC unit, a heat pump out back, and you turn the heater off at night in the winter, you're going to go from 68 or 70 degrees wherever you have it set, and you could be down to 55 or something like that in the morning. So you get these kind of radical shifts. And with a well-designed passive solar home, you're really evening that out, and so you might get temperature shifts that are maybe 4 degrees or 5 degrees or something like that, which makes it super, super comfortable. And you're cutting your heating and cooling costs are a lot lower than if your house wasn't designed that way. And like I mentioned earlier, and probably would be a good time to sort of really emphasize it, because we're about to get into the renewable electricity part and hot water part of this presentation, is that any energy that you don't need, that you save through efficient building or efficient appliances or efficient energy use habits, you turn the lights off when you leave the room, is going to radically lower the cost of renewable energy systems. If it's solar electric or solar hot water, you need to produce that amount of energy. So using less and using energy more efficiently is always the place to start if you're looking at using renewable energy sources. Yeah, so it's a cool thing if you're building from the ground up to consider passive solar design. And now the modern designs have pretty much look like a normal house. And so if you're scared to look too freaky in your neighborhood or whatever, you can have a passive solar house without really standing out too much these days. So we'll get into hot water and then the stuff that I really like, the electrical stuff. Yeah, we got a question way in the back there.
About your home, and you said when it gets really cloudy, you have to kick in your ancillary energy use. How are you doing out there? Are you able to run off the solar almost all the time? Or
Okay. The home that I was talking about was a house that we built for the magazine's founders, Richard and Karen Prez, good friends of mine. My place is also off grid, and I've been it's up Dead Indian Memorial, and I've been up there for 4.5 years, and just moving into a sort of a pretty simple cabin, couple hundred square feet. Been in a camp trailer up until then. I call it techno trash. So I have a trailer. I have all solar. I'm on my 4th gallon of propane in 4 years. I use it. I cook electric hot plate most of the year. In the winter, when I get like a week cloudy weather, I'll use propane if I'm not using the wood stove. And it's 100% solar electric. So solar modules, charging batteries, inverters that take the DC energy that's stored in those batteries, like in your car, and they convert that and condition it to AC electricity, 120 or 240 volts, like you'd use in your house, run appliances off of that. So I'm not using any generator for backup or any of that. So my electricity has been 100% solar for almost 5 years up there. And my loads are pretty minimum at this point. And so to get back to your question, in terms of if it's cloudy for a week and you're off-grid and you're just using solar electric systems, people run engine generators for backup. And so you can run your generator for a couple hours, 3-4 hours, charge your batteries up, and then ride for a day or two. And it all depends on your energy use. And I guess to get back to when we were talking about conservation, what I do is just sort of throttle back my energy use. And it's really kind of a beautiful thing. And we're also used to like flicking a light switch, paying a power bill. We have zero idea where our electricity comes from, how it affects people, the whole thing. People living near coal-fired plants in Wyoming, like we're responsible for that if we use that electricity. And I really kind of get off on, if my batteries are getting kind of low and it's been cloudy for 5 days, I like unplug my subwoofer, you know what I mean, or something like that. So I still feel like I'm pretty comfortable with the whole thing. Yeah, so solar hot water, let's talk about that real quick. People kind of get really intrigued by, or in my experience, solar electric modules. And they're kind of like sort of sexy. And like solar hot water panels, they got real big in the 80s, kind of the first wave during the oil embargoes, and fuel oil costs really skyrocketed, and Jimmy Carter was really pushing some of these federal incentive programs to expand the use of renewables. And Reagan came into office, and those incentives, that money disappeared. And so we really saw the renewable energy industry sort of crash because it was propped up on sort of this artificial money coming into the system. Solar hot water heaters were super popular at that time. Solar electricity was still kind of fringy and really expensive, and the power conversion and conditioning equipment wasn't very good. So during that first round in the 80s, it was solar hot water collectors and wind turbines is sort of where some of the incentive money went. And when it went away, companies went out of business. There wasn't anyone around to service the pump when it failed in a solar hot water system. So there were a lot of systems just sitting on roofs that were not functioning. There wasn't a support network to fix them, kind of on and on. And so we can kind of consider that to be like a black eye on the solar industry. People had systems that didn't work, and it was bad. It was bad PR. And sort of what's happened, what's kind of elapsed since then, is that all the incentive money went away, and for 15 years or something, all of these companies that were manufacturing and designing renewable energy equipment, it was all happening almost completely in the private sector. Very little federal money flows to R&D for developing renewable energy technologies, and that's obviously starting to change based on a number of things: climate change, energy independence, wars we have going on, heightened public awareness. But we have these really robust companies because they did develop in the private sector and they weren't relying on subsidies. Now we're seeing a lot of subsidies coming into the market for solar hot water systems or solar electric systems, and they're really starting to make buying your own electric source, renewable source, have a realistic economic payback. So when we look at incentives that are in place now, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, and I'm just going to finish this thought, we're really kind of, so we have right now in Ashland, there's incentive money available that, depending on your system size and location and solar access, the city and federal incentives will offset maybe half your system, or 40%, or 35%, depending on the specifics. So there's an incentive, there's money that is making your system more cost effective. And I hear a lot from people, and based on the experience in the 80s, when incentives kind of created this bubble of a business, that when the money went away, it all crashed. people say, well, solar is not cost effective. It's only cost effective because of the incentive money that's going to support it. And you bet, that's totally true. The incentives completely help. But what people aren't clear on is the amount of federal funding that goes to all of these mature energy technologies like coal-fired plants, transmission lines, nukes, getting huge amounts of federal money. Right now, we were talking earlier about the majority of electricity used in Ashland is coming off the Columbia River. And a little bit of historical trivia, the dams up on the Columbia were built, most of them, in the World War II era. And they were federally funded, and they were built in part to help the war effort. There was a lot of aluminum, there still is aluminum smelting, manufacturing plants up on the Columbia River. So it was like dump federal money in, make cheap electricity, smelt aluminum, build airplanes, defeat the Germans kind of thing. And the majority of the federal money that went into those plants was never paid back. You know, they kind of maneuver the books however they want on that level. So, and that's just one example of your tax dollars that you pay every year going to fund and help incentivize and offset the cost of where we get most of our electricity from. So when people talk about, well, solar there needs to be incentives to make it cost effective, you got to remember there's a little bit of sort of smoke and mirrors going on, because every time you pay your taxes at the end of the year, you're paying for these other energy sources that you just don't really think of. So, so solar hot water, yeah, you have a question? You need the mic?
In addition to the government incentives you're talking about, I was in there in the late 70s,
Yeah, great.
early 80s.
Tell us some stories.
And I worked for a little plastics company down in Texas, and I was designing a little panel, solar hot water heater panel, that could be competitive with the market.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you had such a tremendous influx of ideas in that. You even had Grumman Aerospace out in Bethpage in Long Island, New York, that was making panels, you know, hot water panels for $1,000 to $1,200 per panel. You could pick up scrap lumber, black paint, use your own piping, and manufacture one for $50, which would give you maybe 88 to 90% efficiency, where the Grumman thing would be 96% efficiency. In addition, another problem with that, two other problems. You could not find plumbers that would install the things properly. The plumbers could not get them up there on the roof, through the attic, into your hot water heater without a lot of potential leaks downstream. Third thing that came along, a lot of the more promising panels at the time, more cost-effective on the market, those companies were bought up by the oil companies. Bingo. There's the other side of your government incentive.
Yeah, yeah, and we hear a lot of, we'll talk about that a little more when we get to the solar electric stuff, because it's a little kind of fascinating. But I'm starting to ramble a little bit. I'm getting a little bit tired, so let me just dial myself back in here. Solar hot water systems, incentives are available through Ashland. Really great after you look at the efficiency around your house, weatherization. Solar hot water is a really great next step. Again, hot water is going to be 11 to 15% of the energy use in a typical household. And the systems are relatively inexpensive compared to solar electric systems. So you might be talking $3,500 to $5,000 installed, and then subtract whatever incentive money is available. Really rough figures, it depends on your roof, what kind of collectors you have. The basic technology this gentleman just kind of pointed to is really pretty simple in a solar hot water collector. You're using the heat energy in the sun to reflects off an absorber plate in an insulated box. The front of the box is typically low iron tempered glass. And inside of that box, you have different configurations of tubing or coiling that heat water or an antifreeze solution, depending on how the system is put together, directly using the sun's energy. And not very many moving parts. Almost all the systems, the current ones installed, have a pump. You know, they're continuous duty pumps that are supposed to last for 20 years in continuous duty. So you might need to replace a pump at year 10 or something like that. But they're really kind of simple and elegant systems. And again, you can use them to heat your domestic hot water for showering, dishwashing, all of that. And then you can also incorporate those systems into hydronic space heating systems like I described earlier, which are running PEX tubing, which is a flexible polyethylene tubing through the floor in spaces. Creates just a great heat. The slab is warm, you can have your shoes off. It's really kind of even distribution of the heat coming up off the floor. Super comfortable, quiet if you live with forced hot air heating. Hydronic is really the bomb. So yeah, solar hot water is a really good thing to do after you work on efficiency in your homes. So yeah.
If you do, what obstacles are there? Because I'm pretty good with piping and stuff. If you do make your own, what about when you go through the home inspection and all that stuff?
You can definitely build your own collectors. I mean, you can do it, and people do it, that have more time than money, I would say. A really common heater for people to build is called a batch heater, and it's different than the collectors I just described, but you're basically taking a metal drum and putting it in an insulated box, and you're heating up 40 or 60 or 80 gallons of water, however big the collector is, at once, and then that's just pressurized, and whatever is pressurizing your water system, if it's city water or if it's a pressure pump or a well pump, will push that hot water through. Those systems are definitely prone to freezing, and you don't really see them in Ashland, I would say, or not very many. They would have to be drained in the winter, and kind of who wants to do that? Some people do, and that's great. More power to them. Most people want the kind of flip of the switch sort of mentality. I'm almost positive incentive money wouldn't be available for home-built collectors. So, but you could call Oregon Office of Energy or talk to Larry with the city here and find out. Yeah. Any other hot water questions? Okay. Let's see, we got like 25 minutes, so let's get into the renewable electricity stuff. People see like solar electric systems around town, you know where any are? Yeah, cool. We're starting to see more. It's pretty good. Right now in the United States, 50% of the solar electric capacity that's installed is in California. They're cranking on it. They have great solar resource, and they've also had really good incentives in place for about 7 or 8 years. So there's a really established installer base in California. There's money available. It's not like a weird thing for people, or as weird to see them. People are getting a little bit more used to, there's something on the roof of my house that looks different. Is it ugly or not, kind of, like what you get used to? I always laugh when people complain about, well, solar electric systems, they look so like gross on my house or whatever, and the neighbors complain, and and I'm like, next time you cruise down the street, look at the power lines, and check out the wires that go into your house, and it's like running extension cords across your living room floor, but everyone's just used to looking at power poles and power lines, and so there's this kind of a gradual shift that's happening in California. It's obviously happening faster than up here, but we're seeing great growth in the solar industry here in Oregon as well. We got a question in the back.
Yeah, I've seen recently there's a new business come out that's offering to put solar panels on your house.
Okay. Yep, Citizenry, and I think there's at least a couple representatives from that business here right now. And we spoke a little bit earlier. I'll just be blunt about it. When I talk to people about getting a solar electric system installed, I say, don't treat it any different than you would any other home improvement project that you do around your house. So you're going to get your kitchen remodel, you're going to build an addition. I always tell people to get multiple bids, talk to more than one contractor to make sure the costs are in line, get references, talk to past customers. How did this contractor perform? Were they on budget? Whatever it is. And that's the advice that I give people when they're getting solar electric or solar hot water systems installed, is the same thing. The Citizenry program is a new program, and it's I would say, really innovative business model. It's super cool. What they're doing is taking venture capital money. Right now they have $650 million reportedly, and they're buying systems or planning to install those systems on people's homes. And then there's a whole renewable energy credits, they call them. You maybe hear of green tags around town get sold. And that's sort of a measure of the greenness attributes of energy that's generated with solar or wind or whatever it is. And when we start looking at more of a system of kind of carbon caps and carbon trading, and big coal plants, if they get their emissions down to whatever level, they can allot that amount of pollution or whatever it is to other plants. It's kind of this whole thing. And it's one model that they're using to combat climate change. They're saying, well, if we can get a bunch of these people to be efficient and we can set the right standards, it'll bring the whole kind of base level down in terms of the carbon emissions. So what Citizenry is doing is they're getting private venture capital, and their goal is to install systems on homes, and there's like no upfront cost to the systems for installation. Or there's a $500 deposit, right? But in terms of the system equipment, there's no cost, and they're offering electricity at the same rates as utility electricity, or somewhere kind of right around there. And the financial model is, I think, really innovative and a cool idea on a commercial scale. California especially, there's this kind of newer sector, kind of tech sector, and it's kind of a clean tech sector. And the venture capital that's pouring into that sector down in California was up in the first 3 quarters last year, 929%. So investors are like paying attention to, this clean tech sector, and that would be like biofuels and industrial scale wind and solar manufacturing. So there's definitely money out there that is coming in. And on a commercial scale, I'll get your question in 1 sec. On a commercial scale, investors are sinking money. They're buying like these megawatt size systems, which would be enough to run, I don't even know how many houses, lots. And then they're figuring it all out based on their tax liability and salvage costs at the end of a 25 or 30-year system life. And then they're selling the green attributes, the renewable energy credits of the system, and they're coming up with this business model that they're getting a good return on their investment, good enough that they would invest millions of dollars into it. So it's happening right now on a commercial level, which is really cool. So what Citizenry is trying to do is bring it down to the residential scale. My advice is to sort of wait and see. They're talking about installing systems in 2008, we're talking about tonight. So 2008, they're talking about starting to install systems. I've been in the industry for, 10 years. I work with manufacturers, distributors, installing dealers, end users on a regular basis. I've toured PV plants. I talk with inverter manufacturers about issues that they have getting their electronic components through all of the testing that goes on. The inverters go through, one of the tests is UL, Underwriters Laboratories. They test every appliance in your house for fire safety, safe functioning. Same people that are testing your toaster with radically different test procedures. All of that stuff takes time and money, and I think that the expectations that Citizenry is setting, based on my experience, aren't realistic. And so I'm not advising people to do that at this time, but you get what you pay for, sort of, potentially. But the financial model, I think, is very intriguing, and I think with the right backing, something like that could totally work. So that's my take on it right now.
Can you repeat the name of that organization?
Yeah, Citizenry. I think there's some flyers up on the board and stuff. Citizenry. It's CITIZENRE.com. You can check it out. As of this morning, they had 7,401 people signed up for the service. You have a question there? Here's a mic coming.
I just wanted to know if you do like a solar water heat, say, for your hot tub and your washing needs and everything, what happens when you have plenty, you know, we get like 100-degree temperatures around here in the summer. What happens when you have plenty?
Like too much hot water?
Too much hot water.
The systems are going to typically be sized to produce somewhere between like 40 and 80% of your hot water on an annual basis. And they're typically not sized to produce 100%. And part of that is it eliminates some of the overheating problems in terms of your water is too hot in the summer. All hot water tanks have a T&P valve, temperature pressure release valve, in any house. And that is plumbed to under the floor or outside. So if the tank gets too hot, the pressure builds up, that valve blows, and it spits some water out. So it's really not an issue in a properly designed system and installed system. And then the water in the tank can get really hot too. So you might be setting your electric water heater at 118, 120 degrees with a solar hot water system. You can get like 160-degree water in that tank in the summer. Serious scalding hazard, and so there's plumbing valves, mixing valves that will always add cold water based on the temperature, so there aren't any scalding issues. It's really a hands-off technology if it's designed and installed right. So, but that's a cool question.
You said you had a hot tub? Oh, well, if you design a system to heat your home in the wintertime, usually you'll need a heat dump during the summer. Hot tubs are really great for that. So if you're designing your solar hot water system for heating in the winter, it's a benefit to get a hot tub or some other heat
It's definitely one way you can do it for sure.
Hey, Joe, can you talk a little bit about net metering and people who are selling power back to the grid?
Yeah, you bet. So I think we should geek the rest of the time on solar electricity. Do people have questions on hydro or wind power? Curious?
Wind, I would like to talk about individual wind too.
Okay. Do we get kicked out of here at 9? How does that work? Preferably we leave at 9. Is that right? Okay, that's great. So we have 15 minutes. What was your question one more time?
Wind. You go for the geeky solar first and then hit the individual wind.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just cover wind really very quickly. And that will lead me into the solar electric thing, so that would be good. Wind turbines, residential scale. There are some pretty solid models out there, but it's a heck of an environment for a piece of equipment to be in. You're trying to get the turbine up as high as you can into the strongest wind that you can get it. So regularly the machines will be seeing 20, 30-mile-an-hour winds, 50-mile-an-hour winds, 90-mile-an-hour winds during big storms potentially. There's bearings, and there's bushings, and there's rotating blades and alternators, and there's really a lot going on, and it's a really fantastic way to make electricity, and we see it on a utility scale. They're building machines that are 5 megawatts and up, just giant machines, and they have really great longevity and the newer models and the designs. But on a residential scale, it's kind of a tougher thing to get a machine that's going to be really robust. And so most wind turbines that you put up, I wouldn't be surprised if you had some sort of failure mode in maybe 5 years or 6 years or right out of the gate, and it's just a hard thing to do. I wouldn't necessarily discourage people from doing it, but I always say, like, if you're the type of guy or gal, like, change the oil in your car or do whatever, you might be the right person to get a wind turbine if you're going to maintain it yourself. Installers will install them, and you can get service contracts for them to maintain them, and it's some of them might need like yearly lubrication or something like that. But it's a system with a lot of moving parts. You're going to need tall towers. Kind of the basic siting criteria are you want the turbine itself 30 feet above any objects within 300 feet. So if you have 40-foot trees in your yard, you're going to be looking at 70, 80-foot tower. Which you really start running into zoning issues potentially or whatever. So where we see, yeah, I mean, there's been tons of studies with wind turbines in terms of bird kill has always been sort of the big thing. which is a complete red herring. There were some of the early wind farms that were installed in California were sited in migratory corridors for different raptors and whatnot. Poorly sited, high bird kill, bad thing. Audubon, people got pissed off. Actually, just this past year, the Audubon Society came around, and now they're saying they're supporting large-scale wind, which they didn't for 20 years or something like that due to bird issues. The bird issues were kind of always based on kind of a few isolated events. I've seen numbers like, it's like orders of magnitude more the number of birds that die hitting windows in homes than die getting hit by wind turbines. You know what I mean? So it's like, or your windshield of your car, you know, so you're killing birds with your car, you like ban your car, you know. Not really. So it's sort of it's an exaggerated issue for sure. So wind turbines, where we see a lot of them now and where they're really effective is in off-grid systems where they're complementing a solar electric system. So you get a lot of wind, typically storm front coming in, you lose the sun, you're getting wind power, you keep your batteries charged, everything is hunky-dory. And kind of a lot of the people that are living that way are typically going to be more inclined to perform maintenance on the stuff or whatever it is. So it's a cool way to make electricity, but compared to a solar electric module, no moving parts, 25-year warranties are standard. I always like to ask the question, what else do you know that has a 25-year warranty? A coffin. Yeah. I had this one great person one time said that their mattress had a 25-year warranty, which I thought was pretty cool. And then, you know, some roofing or whatnot will have 25 or longer warranties. But in terms of a consumer product that you buy, you know, nothing has 25-year warranties. So we're talking about a product that they do accelerated life cycle testing in the labs while they're designing the modules. If they're warrantying them for 25 years, we're all kind of assuming operational lifetimes of 30 years or 35 years or 40 years for modules that kind of sit in their sun, make no noise, and do their thing. And it's sort of your kids will fight over them and your will sort of kind of longevity with them. It's really an amazing technology, and I was talking a little bit earlier about embodied energy, and one of the numbers I love to spit out there is solar electric modules. It takes a lot of energy to make them. They're actually growing crystals, processing those crystals for crystalline modules, which is probably 85–90% of the market right now, smelting aluminum for the frames, all the transport that goes on with manufacturing those modules, and racking systems and sticking them on your roof. And if you installed solar electric modules on the roof of your house in Southern Oregon and you had full sun all day, so you didn't have a lot of shading going on or whatever, the modules would generate as much energy as it took to manufacture them in about 3 to 4 years, depending on the site and the modules. So in terms of embodied energy, after 4 years, you're like clear as far as like Mother Nature is concerned and your environmental impact. And from that point forward, you're really generating like free electricity in terms of resource use. There are no emissions, no nukes, no whatever. And I think that's something that is completely revolutionary about the technology. Coal will never do that. Nukes will never do that. Large-scale hydro will never do that. Yeah, it's good.
I understand that you have now available some very thin, flexible solar panels that use a fraction of the silicone. And of course, they're incorporated in their roofing, or you just roll them out on your roof. You don't need the heavy racking systems and all that. Can you speak?
Yeah, you bet. Most of the modules that are in place now, I was talking earlier, 85% plus are laminated crystalline modules. You're using silicon as the feedstock. It's the same material they use to build the chips in your computers. They're all silicon-based. what he was mentioning is there are a lot of different materials that create the photovoltaic effect. Though you get the photons and the sunlight is what you're using to generate electricity. It's not the heat. Solar electric modules actually work better the cooler that they are, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people. But most of the crystalline modules, they'll dope the modules, it's called, with phosphorus on one side of the silicon and boron on the other side. And just like quick trip to like high school chemistry class, and I hope we don't get tossed out of here on the chemistry note, but phosphorus, boron, one of them has an extra electron in its outer valence, and the other is shy an electron in its outer valence. And the sunlight, the photons in the sunlight, create a charge flow or an electron flow through that circuit, and that's how you're generating electricity. And so that's using boron and phosphorus, which is just one way that you can do it. And so there are a lot of different minerals, when put together, will create the photovoltaic effect. And so what they're doing with the thin film, they're called thin film modules, and the ones you're referring to are manufactured by Unisolar. And they're using about 1/100th as much silicon in the module. And yeah, they're building them so they're flexible. And where we see them getting pretty popular is with standing seam metal roofing. And they make laminates that you can get them 6 feet long or 10 feet long, or I think like up to like 18 feet long. And those laminates are adhered when the roofing is on the ground to the metal roofing. The roof is put into place by a roofer, and everything is wired up. And the output, there's a fair amount of, they sell those thin film modules as performing better at high temperature and in overcast conditions. And from field data that I've seen, you're not really seeing that very much. So, but they're warranted for 20 years. It's a solid technology, and they look great. You know, some people don't want solar electric, modules on their roof. So it's kind of a low profile way to make solar electricity. This is a super cool product, for sure. Yes? Yeah, okay. We got 5 minutes. Should we finish up with that? Thin film. That's what we just talked about. Net metering. Oh yeah, net metering. Super quick, I'll give you the net metering thing. I was involved. I worked, I think it was like 4.5 or 5 years ago, we passed net metering in Oregon, and I worked on that. We had a dozen people. There's a solar industries group in Oregon. A dozen of us would drive up to, would say, it must be Tuesday, we're driving up to Salem. And we would go up there, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Like 12 people can like make a law, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so we created this net metering law in Oregon. Right now, there's net metering in 42 US states. And what net metering is it's legislation happening on a state-by-state level that requires an electric utility to pay a customer with a renewable energy system the same cost per kilowatt hour for electricity you buy from the utility or they buy from your renewable energy system. And it's called net metering because either monthly or annually, you can generate as much electricity as you used, and anything above that, you're usually like forfeiting the extra electricity or whatever. So the programs are designed, and it's called net metering, because you can offset up to 100% of your energy use. And that's starting to change a little bit because people are selling green tags and that sort of thing. So in Oregon's current form of the net metering agreement, and right now the SIA group has been working with the Public Utilities Commission in Oregon and getting ready to go back to the legislature to change some of the wording in the original net metering bill. But you can have either annualized or monthly billing. And I'll take one step back. You have a solar electric system on your roof, and you're generating electricity with it. And you're out, you and the kids are at work, and you're generating more energy than your home is consuming. Your fridge comes on every once in a while, and the light you spaced in the bedroom is still on. As you generate more your system generates more electricity than you're using. It spins your utility. It goes through an inverter, spins your utility meter backwards, and the utility gives you a credit for that electricity. When you get back home at night, the sun's gone, you start using electricity again, your system isn't putting it, there isn't any output, you're drawing those kilowatt hours you stored up during the day back from the utility. And it's sort of this back and forth thing. And it can be zeroed out either monthly, and what we're trying to do now in Oregon is to get it really clear language so that it's annual zeroing out of that net metering. And so if you make more electricity than you use in July and August and September, when there's a lot of sun and the days are really long, you can store up those credits and offset your energy use in October and November and December. So it gives you sort of seasonal energy storage. So, yeah.
So it's based on zeroing out, last question.
Yeah, this is it.
So in Oregon, it's based on zeroing out your electric bill. It's, in Minnesota, there's a 40 kilowatt nameplate rating limit to the amount of electricity you can produce for net metering.
Yeah, kilowatt is a power figure. And so in Oregon, we have up to 25 kilowatts, and that would be an installed array size. So you could have a 25 kilowatt array installed residentially and it would be an acceptable system size for net metering. And so that has to do with installed wattage, not kilowatt hour output. So it's kind of two different things. It's energy versus power. Power is watts or kilowatts, and energy is watt hours or kilowatt hours. Energy use or power use over time. So we're out of time. Yeah, if you guys have any other questions, I'd be happy to kick around for a little bit. And I really appreciate you listening, and thanks for coming.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.